Was there medicine in the Wild West? Of course there was, and it was not at all what you might think. The image of the indomitable conqueror of the prairies has become firmly established in culture. But behind this facade lay a harsh reality in which a simple scratch could be fatal. When the nearest doctor was several days away, a travel medical kit was the only chance of survival. It contained a mix of surprisingly effective remedies and dangerous misconceptions that could do more harm than the disease itself. Watch the video to the end to find out why the most popular painkiller of the time caused more problems than it solved, and which simple pharmacy powder proved to be more effective than most complex mixtures.
This bag was a symbol of hope.
I will reveal the best-kept secret of a Wild West field doctor. It was not some secret mixture, but his bag itself. Imagine a heavy leather bag worn from long journeys, smelling of herbs, alcohol, and carbolic acid. This bag was a real mobile office, where every item had its own specific place. Inside, in numerous compartments and loops, there were dark glass bottles, tin boxes, and neat bundles of instruments. Order was vital, because in a critical moment, there was no time to search for the right tool. In addition to the obvious bandages and scalpels, there were also more unexpected items. For example, small brass scales and a set of weights for accurately weighing powders. An error in dosage could turn medicine into poison. A mortar and pestle for grinding plant components or mixing mixtures were also essential attributes. Many medicines were prepared on the spot, based on the patient's condition. This required the doctor to have not only medical, but also pharmaceutical knowledge. A thick reference book with descriptions of symptoms and recipes was often kept in a separate pocket. In conditions where one had to rely only on oneself, this book was more valuable than gold. It helped to systematize knowledge and not miss important details. The contents of a doctor's bag could reveal a lot about its owner. Some relied more on patented remedies, buying ready-made tinctures and tablets. Others preferred time-tested herbs and minerals, collecting and preparing them themselves. Among the bottles of opium and quinine tinctures, one could find very simple things. For example, ordinary baking soda, which was used to neutralize acidity and for digestive problems, or mustard powder for warming compresses. An integral part of the arsenal were needles and strong silk threads for sutures. They were often stored in a special metal or wooden case. Sterility, as we understand it, was absent, but they tried to keep the instruments clean. This bag was a symbol of hope in the vast expanses of the Wild West. Its appearance in a settlement or on a remote ranch meant that help had arrived. It was the boundary between life and uncertainty. What do you think was the most valuable item in such a bag, apart from painkillers? Share your opinion in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about the 3 pillars of medicine in the Wild West? Doctors at that time adhered to what was known as heroic medicine. Its essence was aggressive intervention in the body's processes using powerful substances. The first and foremost remedy for alleviating suffering was opium, most often in the form of an alcohol tincture called laudanum. It was given for almost everything, from coughs and insomnia to severe pain. It was highly effective, but the risk of addiction was enormous. The second pillar was a substance called calomel, which was actually mercury chloride. It was believed to have a powerful cleansing effect, removing bad juices from the body. Patients were given huge doses of this toxic substance to induce a laxative effect. The consequences of such treatment were often worse than the disease itself. Mercury poisoning led to serious side effects. However, at the time, this was considered a sign that the medicine was working and the body was being cleansed. Against the backdrop of these dubious methods, a third pillar stood out: quinine. This powder, obtained from the bark of the cinchona tree, was almost the only truly effective remedy for malaria. Fever was a real scourge in many areas, and quinine saved thousands of lives. Its bitter taste was familiar to everyone who lived in swampy areas. Quinine was mixed with water or alcohol to mask the bitterness. This is how the famous drink, tonic water, came into being. Unlike calomel, quinine had an obvious and rapid effect. A person suffering from fever attacks felt real relief after taking the medicine. This strengthened faith in medicine, even despite the dangers of other methods. In addition to these three giants, there were other popular remedies. For example, camphor, which was used as a stimulant for heart activity and breathing. Its pungent smell became an integral part of the atmosphere in the infirmary.
Just a moment more.
Doctors combined these substances in various proportions, creating complex recipes. Often, a single mixture could contain opium for sedation, calomel for purification, and quinine just in case. This approach was more of an art than a science. It was this arsenal that formed the basis of treatment for most ailments on the frontier. It was a mixture of real help, dangerous misconceptions, and a desperate belief in the power of chemistry. But what if I told you that the most popular remedy, which is still found in every medicine cabinet, was used completely incorrectly in the Wild West, leading to terrible consequences? In the next chapter, we will reveal the shocking truth about iodine and alcohol. What I am about to tell you will completely change your perception of simple antiseptics. At the end of the 19th century, the study of microbes was just beginning. Doctors already understood that cleanliness was important, but their ideas about antiseptics were quite peculiar. Main agents used to treat wounds were alcohol and iodine tincture. What could be more logical? These substances are still found in every medicine cabinet today, and we know that they are excellent disinfectants. However, the devil was in the details, or more precisely, in the concentration and method of application. Doctors in the Wild West used almost pure, undiluted alcohol. They believed in a simple principle: the stronger the burning sensation, the better it works. They didn't just treat the skin around the wound with this concentrated solution. They poured it generously directly onto the open tissue. This not only caused severe irritation, but also damaged healthy cells. Such aggressive treatment led to chemical burns. As a result, instead of helping the wound to heal, it caused even more damage. The body was forced to fight not only the initial trauma, but also the consequences of such treatment. The same story was true for iodine. A highly concentrated tincture was used. It did kill germs, but it also destroyed living tissue necessary for regeneration. Doctors at that time did not fully understand the difference between disinfecting instruments and antiseptic treatment of a living organism. Methods that were excellent for sterilizing a scalpel proved to be destructive to human flesh. This paradox led to many wounds healing very slowly and with complications. A doctor sincerely wanting to help and using the most advanced means available at the time could unknowingly harm the patient. He won the battle against germs, but lost the war for tissue health. Only with time did the understanding come that antiseptics should be effective, but at the same time gentle. Weaker solutions began to appear that disinfected without causing severe damage. But before that, there were decades of trial and error. This story is a vivid example of how a great discovery in the early stages of its application can bring not only benefits but also harm. Understanding microbial theory was a breakthrough, but there was still a long way to go before safe methods of application were developed. What if I showed you a time machine and we took a look at the arsenal of a 19th century surgeon? His instruments, stored in a velvet or leather case, would be awe-inspiring to a modern person. The shiny steel knives, saws, and probes looked more like the tools of a craftsman than a doctor. The main principle of any operation at that time was speed. Anesthesia was primitive, most often chloroform or whiskey. Therefore, the faster the surgeon finished his work, the better the patient's chances of survival. Because of this, instruments were valued not so much for their elegance as for their durability and effectiveness. An amputation saw had to cut through bone in a few strokes. A scalpel had to remain sharp throughout the entire procedure. The sterility of instruments was relative. They were wiped with alcohol or carbolic acid. But no one thought about sterilization with steam under pressure. Moreover, many surgeons were proud of their work coats covered with stains. This was considered a sign of a prosperous practice. The kit always included various probes. They were used to examine wounds in order to find foreign objects, such as bullets. This procedure was extremely important, as metal left in the body almost always led to serious consequences. Special clamps and ligatures, strong threads used to tie off blood vessels, were used to stop bleeding. The ability to quickly locate and tie off arteries was one of the most important skills for a surgeon. The life of the person on the operating table depended directly on this. After the procedure was completed, the wound was sutured with curved needles and silk thread. The quality of the suture was also very important for further healing. Careless work could lead to serious problems. Operations were often performed in the most unsuitable conditions, on a kitchen table in a farmhouse or right in a field camp tent. A kerosene lamp served as lighting, and random people served as assistants. In such circumstances, the surgeon's skill was especially highly valued. The entire process was a difficult ordeal for both the patient and the doctor. It required not only a steady hand and knowledge of anatomy, but also tremendous psychological endurance. The Wild West surgeon was a truly tough specialist. But how did they cope with the consequences of such procedures? In the next chapter, we will talk about methods of bandaging and care. Once the surgeon had finished his work, the long and difficult stage of wound care began. The dressing materials of the time were very different from those used today. At best, they were made of clean cotton or linen, but often they were simply scraps of old fabric. The idea of sterile bandages was not yet widely accepted. The fabric could be boiled, but more often than not, whatever was at hand was simply used. This, of course, created the risk of secondary infection. One of the most popular methods of cleansing wounds was poultices. They were made from various ingredients that were believed to have the property of drawing out the disease. It was a mixture of tradition and basic medical knowledge. For example, poultices made from flaxseed or breadcrumbs soaked in hot water or milk were often used. The heat from the compress actually improved blood circulation and could promote the rejection of non-viable tissue. This brought temporary relief to the patient. Mustard plasters and compresses were also popular. Mustard caused a strong rush of blood to the skin, creating a feeling of warmth and distracting from the main pain. This method was often used for colds and muscle aches. Caring for the sick was a complex combination of medical prescriptions and time-tested folk methods. Often it was these simple and accessible remedies that helped the body cope with illness. Are you ready for the shocking truth about treating frostbite? Winters in the Wild West were harsh, and frostbite was a common and dangerous problem. However, the most popular method of treating it was not only useless, but also extremely harmful. It was widely believed that a frostbitten limb should be rubbed with snow or immersed in ice water. This idea was based on the false logic that what is frozen must be warmed slowly, like with like. People sincerely believed that they were saving the victim. In fact, this method only made the situation worse. Rubbing with snow or ice caused additional tissue damage. Tiny ice crystals scratched the already fragile frozen skin. Moreover, it did not contribute to the restoration of blood circulation. Cells deprived of oxygen continued to suffer. This method was one of the most dangerous medical myths of the time. The correct way to help, which is known to everyone today, is slow warming. The affected limb should be placed in warm, but not hot water. It is the gradual increase in temperature that allows blood to return to the tissue without additional shock. Some experienced doctors and northerners knew this. They advised wrapping frostbitten areas in woolen cloth and placing the victim in a warm room. However, their voices were often drowned out by the chorus of supporters of the ice method. The consequences of improper treatment were dire. It often led to irreversible damage and the need for amputation. A person could lose fingers or even a limb, not so much because of the frost itself, but because of improperly administered care. But cold was not the only enemy of the pioneers. In the next chapter, we will learn what other threats they faced and how they tried to combat them. A special kind of business flourished in the Wild West, the sale of patent medicines. Salesmen traveling in brightly colored wagons offered miracle cures for all diseases. These remedies did not require a prescription and promised instant healing. The bottles with colorful labels bore grandiose names: pain-relieving balm, nervous system restorer, or Indian cough remedy. Advertisements in newspapers and on posters attributed almost magical properties to them. People desperate for qualified help eagerly bought them. The secret to the effectiveness of many of these medicines was simple. They contained very high doses of alcohol, opium, or even cocaine. Of course, after taking such a mixture, a person felt temporary relief and euphoria. This created the illusion of healing. The pain subsided, the mood improved, and the patient believed that the medicine was working. They bought the next bottle, gradually becoming addicted to its ingredients. The composition of these remedies was a trade secret. Manufacturers were not required to indicate it on the label. Under the guise of a harmless cough syrup, there could be a potent mixture of alcohol and narcotic substances. One of the symbols of this era was the snake oil salesman. Initially, real snake oil, rich in omega-3 acids, was brought to America by Chinese workers, and it really helped with joint pain. But enterprising businessmen quickly picked up on the idea. They began selling mineral oil with added pepper for a warming effect under this name. Of course, it had nothing to do with snakes. Thus, the phrase snake oil became synonymous with quackery and fraud. The fight against this phenomenon began only at the beginning of the 20th century. The first laws were passed requiring manufacturers to indicate the composition of their medicines. This put an end to the era of unpunished sales of dubious elixirs. However, over the decades of its existence, the patent medicine industry caused enormous harm. It not only emptied the wallets of gullible citizens, but also undermined their health. It was the dark side of Wild West medicine, based on advertising and deception. Dental care in the Wild West was perhaps one of the most underdeveloped areas of medicine. There were very few professional dentists, and their services were very expensive. Therefore, people coped with toothache on their own or turned to local craftsmen. Most often, the role of dentist was performed by a barber or blacksmith. They had the necessary tools, pliers and forceps, as well as the physical strength to use them. Dental treatment at that time almost always meant extraction. In most cases, there was no question of anesthesia. The patient was offered a large sip of whiskey for courage. The whole procedure took a few seconds and was a serious test for the nervous system. The instruments used to remove teeth were crude and frightening. A special tooth key resembled an old-fashioned corkscrew. It was placed on the diseased tooth and broken out of the jaw with a sharp twisting motion. The consequences of such procedures were predictable. Often, along with the diseased tooth, part of the jawbone was removed or adjacent teeth were damaged. The hole left after removal healed slowly and painfully. Virtually no attention was paid to the prevention of dental disease. Toothbrushes and toothpaste were rare. People cleaned their teeth with salt, soda, or simply wiped them with a cloth. The pioneers' diet was also not conducive to dental health. It was rich in carbohydrates, such as cornbread and molasses. This created ideal conditions for the development of tooth decay. It was not until the end of the 19th century that the situation began to change. The first foot-powered drills and filling materials began to appear. But for most residents of remote areas, a visit to the blacksmith remained the only way to get rid of toothache for a long time.
Invisible organisms, not spirits, cause illness.
Far from cities and doctors' offices, the main burden of caring for the sick fell on women's shoulders. They were the keepers of the home medicine cabinet and knowledge about treating common ailments. Every ranch wife was both a nurse and a pharmacist. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation, from mother to daughter. Old family Bibles or cookbooks contained entire sections with recipes for coughs, fevers, or stomach upsets. It was a veritable encyclopedia of survival. Women knew how to collect and dry medicinal herbs, prepare decoctions, tinctures, and ointments from them. They knew which plant to apply to a cut to stop the bleeding and which to brew to calm a child. Their experience was based on centuries of observation.
Look, a little lamb.
When someone in the family fell ill, it was the woman who took on all the care. She changed bandages, prepared special meals, and monitored the patient's temperature. The outcome of the illness often depended on her patience and skills. In addition to traditional European knowledge, the settlers actively learned from the indigenous peoples of America. The Indians had lived on this land for centuries and had thoroughly studied the properties of the local flora. Their knowledge of medicinal plants was vast. It was from the Indians that the settlers learned about echinacea, which they used as a powerful remedy for infections and snake bites. Today, the extract of this plant can be found in any pharmacy. This is a direct legacy of Indian medicine. Thus, medicine at the everyday level was a synthesis of European heritage and the wisdom of indigenous peoples. It was pragmatic and based on real experience. Women armed with this knowledge were true guardian angels of their families. By the end of the 19th century, the Wild West was beginning to change. The construction of railroads, the growth of cities, and the development of communications gradually brought the era of isolation to an end. These changes also affected medicine. One of the major breakthroughs was the gradual acceptance of Louis Pasteur's microbial theory. Doctors began to understand that invisible microorganisms were the cause of many diseases. This revolutionized their thinking. The idea of the need for cleanliness and sterility replaced the proud frock coats with stains. Doctors began to wash their hands before operations and use carbolic acid for disinfection. These simple measures dramatically reduced post-operative mortality. The first hospitals began to appear in growing cities. These were small, often wooden buildings, but they made it possible to provide care in much better conditions than on a kitchen table. The concept of inpatient treatment emerged. Along with the railroads, more qualified specialists began to arrive in the West. These were graduates of medical schools on the East Coast and in Europe. They brought with them new knowledge and methods of treatment. We can see that medicine in the Wild West was a complex and contradictory phenomenon. It was a mixture of brilliant insights and dangerous misconceptions, effective folk remedies, and outright quackery. It was the medicine of an era of great change, standing on the threshold of a scientific revolution. The history of doctors and their patients on the frontier is not just a collection of interesting facts. It is a reminder of the long and difficult path that medicine has traveled to become what we know today. It is a story of courage, mistakes, and an unyielding will to live in the harshest conditions. What other aspects of life in the Wild West would you like us to explore? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new episodes.